Welcome back to Diabetic Foot Files. I'm your host, Dr. G, and this is the podcast where we explore the science, the history, and the hidden stories behind wounds, infections, and limb preservation, because that's our main goal. And today we're going to talk about amazing green medicine, chlorophyll. When I think of chlorophyll, I think of the magic school bus, the teacher putting them in the plant, and they're being able to see how photosynthesis works. I miss those days. But chlorophyll was actually used in World War II. So this is the story behind this amazing green pigment that makes plants alive. And it actually became an experimental weapon against infection. And that was long before modern antibiotics existed. So today we're going to explore the chemistry of chlorophyll, why it actually chemically looks almost like identical to blood, how it is being used in the battlefield, in World War II, okay? And its antimicrobial mechanism and the molecular biology behind its healing effects, and whether chlorophyll actually has a future in the role of diabetic wound care. And this, again, stay with me, make common sense comment. This is only for medical education. Do not be putting chlorophyll on your wounds, okay? Leave everything to the wound care specialist, okay? So let's begin. So this amazing green molecule chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the pigment responsible for photosynthesis. And the process, what is photosynthesis? The process that plants use to convert sunlight into chemical energy. So without chlorophyll, plants cannot produce glucose. Oxygen would not be released into the atmosphere, and complex life on Earth would not exist. And at a molecular level, chlorophyll is a porphyrin. I don't say porphyrin, okay? Porphyrin ring structure because I get tongue tied all the time. So this structure sounds quite familiar because the molecular structure of chlorophyll versus hemoglobin is very similar. Okay, so this molecule, because there's a molecule that carries oxygen in our blood, hemoglobin, it pretty much is nearly identical in its chemical architecture. The only difference is one atom. So in hemoglobin, the center of the atom of hemoglobin is iron. But in chlorophyll, the center atom is magnesium. But everything else is remarkably similar. So their chemical architecture is pretty much almost identical except for the center atom. Hemoglobin center atom is iron, chlorophyll center atom is magnesium. And scientists in the early 1900s noticed the similarity and asked the fascinating question, could chlorophyll influence blood healing or infection? So, discovery of chlorophyll as a medicine. So, in the early 20th century, researchers began isolating chlorophyll from plants and testing its medical properties. One of the most important discoveries was chlorophyllin. Chlorophyllin, okay? So, chlorophyllin is a modified water soluble derivative of chlorophyll, and it was developed by chemists working for Parker Davis, which was one of the most major pharmaceutical innovators of the early 1900s. So chlorophyllin had several fascinating properties, which included antimicrobial effects, odor neutralizing effects, and anti-inflammatory potential. But the real turning point for this medicine, as for its chemical properties, came during World War II. So how did World War II help change wound medicine with chlorophyll? Okay. So before antibiotics like penicillin became widely available, wound infections were one of the most leading causes of death on the battlefield. Soldiers suffered from gangrene, abscesses, tissue necrosis, putrid wound odor, and massive bacterial contamination. And physicians were desperate for antimicrobial agents. So they began experimenting with chlorophyll dressings. And one of the early advocates was this doctor, the surgeon named Benjamin Gruskin. Gruskin, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing his last name wrong, but he studied chlorophyllin in infected wounds. And the results pretty much shocked clinicians. When he applied chlorophyllin to the wounds, it appeared to reduce the bacterial growth, neutralize the odor, and promote granulation tissue formation. So doctors began calling chlorophyll the green antiseptic. So, why does chlorophyll reduce wound odor? One of the most striking effects of chlorophyll that they noticed was odor elimination. So, infected wounds have a smell. All of them have a smell, okay? Because the bacteria produces compounds like putavalin and hydrogen sulfide and other chemicals that cause the smell. These are the same chemicals that are produced during tissue decomposition. So chlorophyllin appeared to bind to these molecules and neutralize them. And this is why chlorophyll was later used as an internal deodorizer for patients with colostomy bags, necrotic tumors, or chronic wounds. Even today, chlorophyll derivatives are sometimes used in wound care products for odor control. So, laboratory studies have shown that chlorophyll derivatives do inhibit bacteria such as Staphylococcus aureus, E. coli, and our favorite Pseudomonas but aeruginosa. But the three mechanisms are believed to be involved to cause this antimicrobial activity from chlorophyll. One mechanism is the photodynamic bacterial destruction. So, when exposed to light, chlorophyll molecules can produce what we call reactive oxygen species. And this process is called photodynamic therapy. And reactive oxygen species attack the bacterial cell membrane, the proteins, and the nucleic acids, essentially destroying the microbe itself. Next, another mechanism that is used for its antimicrobial properties is something called toxin binding. So chlorophyll can bind to toxins such as it's called it's at the tip of my tongue, afloxacin. I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm just gonna spell it. AFLATOXIN. Okay? But this produces and reduces the toxin absorption and protects the cell from damage. So toxin binding. Next mechanism for its antimicrobial properties is anti-inflammatory signaling. I think people are noticing a pattern that a lot of things that are very beneficial to wounds are anti-inflammatory. So, chlorophyll derivatives appear to influence inflammatory pathways like the NFK beta signaling and cytokine expression. But also, inflammation is good at a certain extent. Uncontrolled inflammation is bad because inflammation is definitely needed for your immune system to function properly, correct? So, but it is told that chlorophyll does reduce excessive inflammation that can damage the tissue. So, researchers noticed that wounds treated with chlorophyll often developed healthy granulation tissue faster. That's what we want as any wound care specialist. We want to see healthy granulation tissue. We want that proliferative phase, okay? So, possible mechanisms include improved oxygen diffusion, reduced bacterial load, decreased inflammatory change, and granulation tissue formation involves fibroblast migration, collagen deposition, and then angiogenesis. And these processes are quite essential for wound healing. That's why I told y'all my favorite phase is the proliferative phase. I love the remodeling phase too, but usually that phase I'm not the proliferative phase is the one that you get to see all the magic happening, in my opinion, okay? So, why does this matter for diabetic wounds? Because this is diabetic foot files. Diabetic wounds, as we know, are very complicated by several factors like poor circulation, neuropathy, bacterial colonization, and immune dysfunction. And like we said, common pathogens are like Staphylococcus aureus, Enterococcus bacillus, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and chlorophyll theoretically could help with wound odor, bacterial burden, and oxidative stress, but it is not a substitute for proper wound care. Okay, so what is proper wound care? Debridement, vascular, vascular, infection control, and pressure offloading. Okay, so why did chlorophyll disappear from modern wound care? Despite the promising early studies, chlorophyll wound therapy largely disappeared after antibiotics became widespread. So once drugs like penicillin, streptomycin became available, physicians shifted towards the systemic antimicrobial therapy. So because, chlorophyll was considered less powerful. But today, with the rise of antibiotic resistance, and people needing antibiotic stewardship, right? The interest of any alternative antimicrobials are returning, pretty much returning back to nature. So, research, recent research studies have suggested that chlorophyll derivatives may have a role in, like we said, photodynamic antimicrobial therapy, wound odor control, and detoxification pathways for the wound. So, scientists are now investigating how chlorophyll interacts with oxidative stress pathways, inflammatory signaling, and micro microbial bio biofilms, the microbial biofilms, okay? Because remember, biofilms are pretty much one of the best defense systems that bacteria has because it makes them impenetrable, right? Biofilms are a major problem in diabetic wounds. That like I said, the best defense system for these bacterial communities to continue to infiltrate and colonize that wound. So these bacteria communities are protected by this extracellular sticky matrix that it makes, okay? And that's why disrupting the biofilm is one of the biggest challenges in modern wound care. So, final thoughts when it comes to chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is not just a pigment. I love me some chlorophyll. Just even as an internal deodorizer, it works very well. And it doesn't just make plants green, it's actually one of the most important molecules on Earth. It powers the oxygen cycle, it feeds our ecosystem, and you know what? It has untapped medical potential. So, from ancient plants to the World War II battlefield wounds or to modern wound research, this green molecule continues to surprise us. And I hope everybody liked this episode of Diabetic Files because it was kind of interesting. I feel like it was a combination of diabetic wound care and magic school bus. So yay. So if you like it, share it with somebody. There's I don't that's what I keep on telling people. Wound care is so fascinating. And sometimes the secret isn't just in the pharmacology. It might just be growing in your garden. Remember we talked about skin gardening? And this is Diabetic Book Files with Dr. G, and take care of your feet because they take care of you.